Hey, hi, how are you? You know what? Workers are still getting hurt and still dying all over the place. And part of the problem is the formative time is being lost on less important things. And well, what do I mean here? Well, let's go back to the beginning.
What's your point, Kevin?
First off, with new worker orientations, they're either inadequate, ineffective, or substandard, or some weird cookie cutter solution is being put in place. Or worse, they're just not being done at all. Or even another bad problem is there's folks with a lot of potential wanting to do a good new worker orientation, but they're forced to either rush through it because in the wake of, diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives, or the workers that are taking the orientation have been forced to endure ESG sermons to the point where they're just exhausted and they don't want to hear what you have to say about safety any longer. So part of the problem is safety orientations need to be put at the forefront. Realistically, sign whatever is legally required to sign and then get them on that orientation. So what I've done is when I was putting together this video, I was also doing a bit of research, okay? And what I did is I Googled workplace accidents. And, well, have a look. I mean, just a look-see. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to Google a week's worth and see what it comes up with. And look, we got, Alaska North Slope oil industry employee dies in a workplace incident. Or we got this one shortly thereafter. And this one, I think, was pretty much the same day. In fact, it didn't take much. I just Googled 7 days worth, and I asked for 7 days, and here's what I got. It didn't take much. So here's the problem. Worker orientations aren't being done, and they're contributing, or not being done properly, and they're contributing to workplace accidents. So what I wanted to do is introduce this best practice approach to conducting new worker safety orientations. Now, as an added bonus, if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how to download a template. And I'll also point out 3 reasons why you need to be conducting a good best practice new worker orientation. Really, there has to be some onus on both parties, the supervisor and the new worker, to complete this process. Both of them have to own it, in other words. Now, there's 3 phases to this orientation. You have the initial worksite tour with the supervisor or the supervisor's designate. The second piece encompasses what the worker will do on their own, either with some reading material or at a computer. Ideally, a computer works best, but either way will work. And then, of course, the third part is a final meeting with the supervisor. Okay, curious? Well, let's jump in, okay, and have a look. The orientation begins with the supervisor or designate meeting the worker and ensuring they're aware of their rights as a worker. Now, here in Canada, we have some basic rights. There, of course, the right to know about the hazards associated with the tasks you're going to perform, the right to participate, and that's meaningful participation in the health and safety activities of the workplace, and, of course, the right to refuse unsafe work. Ideally, also, the supervisor should make sure right away that the worker's aware of how to refuse unsafe work. They need to review the process for refusing unsafe work. They also should note any processes around submitting issues or concerns to the Health and Safety Committee. And, of course, reinforce the purpose of job hazard analysis and assessments. They need to be pointed out and thought of during the worksite tour. And during this worksite tour, we're also looking at basic safety-related points, such as who the OHS committee members are. So you could take them to the OHS board, for instance, and point out the names, or if during your tour you happen to see a few people, introduce them. Point out who the first aid attendants are. Make sure that they know how to access first aid. If there's personnel in charge of evacuation, such as fire marshals or fire captains or rescue personnel, they should be noted as well as all emergency exits and, of course, muster points. But not forgetting to point out things like fire extinguishers, first aid kits, automated external defibrillators. If your workplace is complex enough to require eyewash stations and emergency showers or decontamination areas, those should be pointed out as well. The next set is about the hazard assessments, the job safety analysis, and the hazard controls. even if they're just pointed out and talked about at this point, because they will be, the worker's going to be doing their own research in a bit. We'll talk about that in a bit. But using the worker's job safety analysis or job hazard assessment for reference, there should be a review of any safe work procedures pertaining to the worker's job, such as powered mobile equipment if it's necessary. I'm talking about forklifts, scissor lifts, etc., and their use, working at heights, working alone, etc. Or if confined space entry is a thing, maybe that should be talked about at this point. Just saying. If it hasn't been done already, any safety-related training, certifications, or qualifications needs to be addressed. In addition, any training for shortfalls or gaps, including like job-specific or site-specific training that might need to be considered. Any training shortfalls should be considered and set up immediately, and it should also be noted here on the worker's orientation and in your checklist and paperwork that there may be restrictions on duties until such training is completed. Going a bit further, the length of time that you're spending on Part A, this first part, is going to depend on the size and complexity of your work site. But I want you to remember back to your first day on the job. Did it kind of feel like you were drinking from a fire hose at that time as far as the information was going? Were you suffering a bit of information overload? Just saying. Even more important than that is if you have a poor attitude about it, it's going to reflect on what the new worker is taking in.
This is a waste of time.
Yeah, like that. So now, let's get on to Part B, where the worker has to do some work. Part B is where the worker is going to plunk themselves down in front of a computer with a coffee and a snack, hopefully, and start doing their own research. But here's the catch. If you'll notice that there's places for the worker to be taking some notes, and they should be taking notes throughout their whole entire orientation. I'll explain why as we go along, but bear with me. But this is where the worker will need to familiarize themselves with things like the company OHS staff, even if it's just you. If you're the only health and safety person, yeah, fine. But they should also know all of your contact information, so they might want to note that there. They also want to make some notes on the OHS policies and note the main points, especially things like the OHS policy, like I said, and the violence and harassment policies. Incidentally, those of you folks that are involved in the Certificate of Recognition program in the different provinces here in Canada, it's something that gets asked during the core audit. Can the worker speak to the main points of the OHS policy, and maybe even further, what are the main points in the violence and harassment policies? Just a thought. Now, during this time, they can also learn and understand the company's safety expectations of them, their roles and responsibilities, for want of a better term. They should also be pointed out to the local OHS legislation. After all, it's a right. They should also understand how to report incidents and what's expected of them for an incident investigation. And hey, if you want to be over the top, that better than your average bear, what you might want to do at this time is have them complete an incident report on a mock incident. Just a thought. You'll thank me for it later. Hopefully. And during this time, they also want to be looking at any other pertinent safety documents, additional SDS, or if you have a WMIS or a SDS database, how they might access it. Also, you can look at other things like safe lifting techniques and make sure that they're aware of all of their safe work policies because they are at administrative control. Once they've done this, they have to sort of check in with their supervisor, whether it's making an appointment at the end of the day or just an immediate check-in. There's likely going to be questions on both sides. I'm hoping, in fact, the supervisor will have questions for them, seeing if they did complete their necessary training, or that the worker might have some additional questions for the supervisor. But this 15 to 20 minute, maybe even half an hour meeting should be enough to clear up any misconceptions and fill any gaps. In fact, well, there's more. Yes, there's always more. Supervisors, you're likely thinking to yourself, how in God's name am I supposed to remember all of this? Have I got a deal for you? I've left links in the description. Yep, they're way at the bottom. And if you're grateful, you can always hit that thanks button. But the links include a template for the worker part and a set of instructions for you, the supervisor. That set of directions is fairly simple. It's going to guide the supervisor through the whole entire process. Now, on that note, feel free to edit, add, delete, whatever you need to make it work for you, by all means, okay? And really and truthfully, if you have a look here, it's really not that difficult. It's just a matter of all the directions are there. And like I said, feel free if you want to edit and everything according to what you feel. And feel free to say thanks too. Those 3 things I was talking about. 1, the worker is going to know how to do their work safely. They're going to know what to do if there's health and safety concerns. Now, like I said, the other thing here is those of you that are participating in the Certificate of Recognition program, if that worker keeps their copy, and you should keep a copy of it too as well, both should have signed copies, they can take and have a look at and review everything that's on that form. And they should be able to answer about 95% of any of the core audit interview questions, if you're doing it properly. You'll thank me for it later. Sooner, I hope. Oh, yes, and number 3. You know what? You always want to hope that the employee will be doing the best that they can do and behaving at optimal levels and doing their work at optimal levels, but you may have performance management issues. If they revolve around safety, guess what? You've got a baseline now that they can't say, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I didn't know this. Okay? The proof is in the pudding, and well, the proof is in the form. And you'll be able to go back to them and say, hey, you were taught this, and you can deal with it accordingly. Hopefully you'll never have to get to that point, but at least you'll have those 3 things. They'll know how to do the job safely. They'll be able to answer any Certificate of Recognition safety questions. And of course, you'll have that key baseline performance for baseline for performance management. But now, really and truthfully, when we get right down to it, there's no reason that every person viewing this video shouldn't be able to know how to do a good new worker safety orientation. It really boils down to leadership, leading the way, leading by example and doing what is necessary and working safety into the workflow. Be a leader, lead the way. And if you and others are doing just that, maybe, just maybe, we'll put a dent in those headlines. Okay? Take care. Bye for now.